One of those gray days when even coffee at the local establishment seemed unnecessary, an unusual guest appeared on the doorstep of Marlsfrog. The door to the bar swung open with a soft creak, ringing the bell to signal that a customer had entered. It was a monster hunter holding the head of one in his hand, wearing armor and his gaze full of determination. The patrons, busy with their conversations and cocktails, paid no attention to him. The warrior did not come for entertainment, and, hiding his sword, he approached the bar counter. There, a local bartender he knew approached him and, while serving him a glass of foamy drink, asked how the hunt had gone for Old Man Chow. The warrior calmly replied that it was a short walk with the recruits through a secret area of the second level, so the only valuable thing he had was the fangs and skin of a fanged wolf. Suddenly, Chow turned his eyes to the screen, saying that now, finally, what everyone had gathered here for would begin. The interference on the screen gradually disappeared, and everyone's attention was drawn to the Supreme Council Hall, where a parliamentary meeting was taking place for murder. Powerful voices rang out from the podium, their words reflecting the tension in the air. The camera slowly panned around the room, showing the deputies all with determined expressions on their faces. After the results were announced, it became clear the hero's fate hung in the balance because all 325 votes were for the execution of the sentence. Then the man with the decision in his hands shouted that in the year 7, according to the new calendar, a verdict was passed on case 00 the Lost Mask. Suddenly, the President of Parliament, Hayao, said that during the war, Musk had illegally imprisoned and executed more than 30,000 people in a purge of the Commonwealth's upper echelons. He also attacked friendly peoples of other countries, destroying strong trade relations with them, causing food shortages in the northern region of the Commonwealth. For the above crimes, the Supreme Council Hall sentenced Musk to death. However, for his service to humanity in the fight to drive out the alien invaders, Parliament decided to strip Musk of only a few titles. He is no longer the Supreme Leader or Supreme Marshal of the Commonwealth, but the title of Special Hero was decided to remain. And since Musk is the only special hero in the entire Commonwealth, no matter what, he will be obliged to return to the battlefield if something happens. While the meeting was going on, the establishment's visitors watching it on the screen were heatedly discussing what was happening. The man with the glass in his hand said that if it weren't for this Musk who fought alone against alien enemies and monsters during the disaster that year, humanity would have come to an end. The guy sitting opposite objected, since the credit for those battles belonged to all of them, as well as the hero, Hayao. The friend of the speaker supported him and said that it was high time to get rid of this trash. The man got angry, shouting that even heroes with superpowers gave up in that disaster, and only Musk stood until the last and was able to save everyone on the day that was called a living hell. But the guy objected because then Musk believed that even after the creation of the Commonwealth and the victory over the mutants, they still exist. So humanity is not ready for a good life. He even claimed that some of the heroes of the Commonwealth were secretly bribed by unknown forces and sent them all back to the dark times. So the guy was sure that Musk was either crazy or wanted to go back to the time when he was omnipotent and everyone admired him. The man sat down deep in thought, certain that this was not so, but he did not have time to finish his justification. Hayao appeared on the screen again and said that Musk could leave this place with the honor of a special hero. People will never forget his contribution in overthrowing the mutants and saving humanity. Given Musk's past crime, these are the only terms they can give him under Commonwealth law. After the decision was made, Musk opened his eyes for the first time and looked at the President of the Parliament standing in front of him. He slowly looked up and saw before him an entire hall filled with faces full of indifference and condemnation. Musk didn't understand what was happening, thinking that he had died from a sudden attack by the Night Lord, but what was happening seemed like an even worse development. Now he appeared before everyone in the place, where he was tried and betrayed by his own partners. The silence in the room was deafening, and every breath seemed like thunder in his ears as Musk's entire life flashed before his eyes. The convict felt the darkness of betrayal enveloping him, and hope was born in his soul, despite everything he did not want to give up. And then a notification popped up in front of him that he had completed the Revival of Humanity quest, so now he could choose his reward options. The first option is the Hero's Path, in which Musk will still continue to protect humanity while remaining in the shadows. The second option is the path of a monster who treats people with contempt, who behave no better than the heartless monsters who destroyed the hero. The system also warned that after choosing a scenario, Musk would be redirected to the F-level zone in 20 minutes. Looking at this, the guy's eyes were filled with hope, since he certainly did not expect that he would be reborn. But now, Musk again found himself at the crossroads of a historical revolution, since a new crisis will soon arise regardless of the path he chooses. But this time, he will definitely not make a mistake and will choose the right path, considering how they treated him now. With confidence in his eyes, Musk has chosen the path of a monster who believes that stupid human beings simply cannot understand his behavior. Suddenly, the president's voice was heard asking if Musk's silence meant he was not satisfied with the verdict. Yao himself knew that Musk was the strongest hero in this world, but he lacked wisdom in politics, so he lost a lot. Over the past couple of years, the community has completely destroyed Musk's credibility in the eyes of others, so for them he was a hero, but has become a relic of the past. Now he is a parasite with an old outlook on things, desiring power, who does not allow humanity to break free from the shackles of the past and develop. This trial will completely isolate Musk from power, and the hero will become just a harmless statue for everyone. If he dares to disagree with the verdict, he will become just an impudent person who does not want to part with power, reducing his authority even more. And everything went according to the plan of the cunning leader of the parliament when he heard that Musk was protesting the court's decision. This created a furor in the hall, as everyone was surprised by such impudence and was hostile. Yao smiled, as this was what he had been waiting for, thinking that Musk would now start justifying his actions, which would destroy him even more. One of the viewers, that same guy, thought so too and shouted that Musk simply doesn't want to lose his power, but that's funny! He won't be able to keep people around him anymore because he sacrificed so much to get this power, so he only deserves a noose around his neck. But then Musk's voice came from the speakers saying that he was giving up the title of special hero. No one really expected such a statement, so everyone present in the bar fell silent, looking at the screen in surprise. This was clearly not the intention of the president, who slapped the table because he, like everyone else, expected Musk will cling to his title. But instead he gave up all the privileges left to him through which he could be controlled. Collecting his thoughts, Musk stood up and repeated that he was relinquishing his title, his voice clear as a bolt of lightning in the silence. The guy no longer wanted to be who he was forced to be, so he added that he was tired of being a hero. Yao shouted angrily, "How dare Musk express dissatisfaction with his pathetic situation?" But the guy, coming down from the stage, replied that there was not even a grain of discontent here, because he was much calmer than before. Musk was ready to leave behind everything that had once seemed important and step into the unknown, free from the shackles that had been imposed on him. But the president still could not believe what was happening because he thought that the hero would simply humbly live out the rest of his days and quietly support the people. The thought occurred to him that Musk wanted to use his power alone against the entire Commonwealth. Then Yao furiously shouted that a hero couldn't just leave like that. Musk calmly turned his head and asked what else was required of him. The president added that since Musk has given up his status as a special hero, he should also get rid of his powers. The meeting was starting to get out of control because no one expected such an outcome. One of the guys at the bar watching this asked what the president meant, and his friend replied that it was elementary. "President, he just wants to get rid of Musk's power completely." The guy sitting next to him asked how he could get rid of the power. The girl from the company asked what rank the hero had because his strength was enormous. Then Chow's voice, sitting next to him, said that Musk was ranked 13, which was 4 levels higher than President He, who was in second place. No one except Musk is capable of passing the area above level 10, and it is unlikely that anyone will succeed even in the future. Suddenly, the president's cry was heard from the speakers again, adding that there is only one reason why Musk is in his position now. The entire Commonwealth poured its resources into it, and people sacrificed themselves. So Musk can't just play with the souls of the people of their community. It's a disgrace to the entire community. So if the guy really wants to leave, he must give up all his power. Musk paused and, thinking, asked himself as if he should give up his power. The air at that moment was filled with tension, most of all emanating from the president looking at the exiled hero. Everyone around him was worried about how Musk would react to this demand, because his strength was once a subject of admiration and fear. Those present froze in anticipation, and the viewers behind the screens watched this moment with bated breath. Then the hero, smiling, suddenly nodded, saying that he agreed to this, but his voice did not sound like capitulation, but rather determination. At that moment, Musk felt the energy inside him begin to boil, and he released his power, filling the room with blinding light. The boy raised his hand, saying that he refused the power that was released with great might. It fell upon the hall like a powerful pressure, shaking everything around and making people tremble with fear. The strongest energy was concentrated in the guy's hand, who was not going to stop, releasing it. Eventually, it turned into a huge destructive ball, overwhelming everything around it. Horror gripped everyone in the room because they could not cope with the pressure of such force. They were pinned down against the tables, and all the members of Parliament could do was call for help. Panic gripped everyone except one person, the president, who, standing in his place, was the only one who could withstand Musk's power. Hiyao looked at him with hatred, because even at rank 9, he had to use all his strength to stand and not fall to his knees in front of Musk. At that moment, the room descended into chaos, but for the president, this was only the beginning of a new understanding of strength and power. Musk continued to unleash his power, saying that everyone around him wanted it, so let them have it. Suddenly, from the heart of the hall where the storm of power had erupted, a huge beam of energy burst forth that could no longer fit within the building. The beam shot up quickly, piercing the ceiling of the building like lightning tearing through the dark sky. It broke through the roof, leaving a gaping hole behind it, and shot into the sky, emitting a large amount of light. He was able to attract the attention of the entire city, and for a moment everyone around stopped, their eyes fixed on this mysterious phenomenon. People became scared, thinking that a new king-class monster had appeared, and quickly began to look for shelter. The explosion of energy rose higher and became larger, leaving sparks and smoke behind it. This continued for several more minutes, as it was impossible to release such a huge amount of energy quickly. At the end of this time, all members of Parliament were lying on their desks and did not move, as they could not withstand the pressure created. Musk continued to release the power until it finally ran out and the beam became smaller. President, he was surprised because he was the only one who was able to hold out for 10 minutes before all his strength was exhausted. However, now before him stood not a hero, but a very ordinary man. And since Musk no longer had power, there was no need to fear him. But the boy himself, standing under the light that once symbolized his power, now felt only emptiness. The loss of power left a cold indifference in his soul, and he looked at the destruction around him as if it did not concern him. The president, watching the departing hero, could not hide his sly smile. His eyes sparkled with cunning, and he perceived this situation as a victory. Musk, ignoring the president's insolent grin, slowly walked toward the exit of the hall, grabbing his mask. It was then that he first tore it off himself and threw it aside as the noise, chaos, and condemning looks were left behind. President? He gloated, wishing Musk would get out of here because he was about to die. But suddenly a bright red light appeared right at the door, completely absorbing the former hero. In an instant, it was as if he had entered a portal, dissolving into thin air. President? He couldn't believe his eyes. It was impossible. But he didn't know that Musk had teleported to the secret area of Level 4, the nest of the female spider. This place was a gathering place of not the weakest monsters, but not very strong ones either, which was ideal for advanced warriors. They were the ones who most often passed through the portal, and this time a whole squad came here. Their captain, the first to step through it, announced that today they had entered a secret area of Level 3, with normal enemies of Level 1 and demons of Level 2. The final boss will be only spiders, guardians of the 3rd level, and their team of cutting steel will easily deal with them because all of them are not lower than the 2nd level. However, the captain had heard that the spiders here were as big as a man and asked if anyone was afraid of them. One of the girls from the squad turned to little Chang, telling her not to be afraid, but the girl asked not to mock her and replied that she was not afraid. One of the guys asked the captain to move quickly because he had already spent all his money, so it was time to earn some money by destroying monsters. Suddenly, one of the guys said that Musk's trial took place today, regretting that he didn't see it with his own eyes, to which his friend replied that you can always watch the broadcast at home. The girl added that if the other professionals had not gone to court, they would not have been able to go to this secret area today. Suddenly, the captain's voice was heard, stopping the conversation and saying that it was time to move out. The whole team was united and agreed to work hard and quickly deal with this place. But suddenly light poured out of the portal again, which meant that someone was heading here. The captain, as well as all the members of his team, turned around to see who else would be in the dungeon today. The darkness of the dungeon was suddenly cut by a bright light when an unfamiliar guy stepped through the portal. The members of the hunting team froze in bewilderment, especially little Chang, who looked at the guy's figure with curiosity and caution. The guy, not paying attention to their surprised faces, stepped forward, confident in himself. The hunters looked at each other in surprise because the guy didn't have any equipment or weapons with him. The dungeon was too dangerous to come here just like that, but there was complete calm in the stranger's eyes. He thought that he had already forgotten what the secret areas of the lower levels looked like. It was a pleasant nostalgia for him, because the last time he was here was when he woke up and became a professional. It was necessary to pass the test in a certain time, but this place turned into an endless loop. It's not for nothing that even monsters avoid it. It was there that the boy encountered an unknown demon deity, and it was here that the system decided to send him. He was stripped of all his powers, returning to the first level with no stats. He simply had a normal human status, no overlap, an undefined monster status, and no monster component. The guy himself did not know what the choice he made would lead to, but his past life had clearly proven that the hero's path was completely incapable of saving humanity. It was unknown where the cold-blooded monster's path would lead, but the guy was sure that something interesting was waiting for him. Suddenly, the captain turned to the stranger and asked if the boy wanted to go through this dungeon. And then, surprised and interested, he asked where all the guy's weapons were. The boy extended his hand towards the captain, clenched into a fist, and replied that this was his weapon. The captain smiled and concluded that the guy was a martial arts master who saved a ton of money on equipment by using his body as a weapon. Then the captain asked what level the guy was, since he dared to appear in the third level area, which meant he was a professional. The captain was afraid that this kid would take part of their team's reward, but suddenly the guy said that he was only at level 1. As soon as he said this, the whole team turned even more surprised glances at the guy. The captain turned to him again and asked if he was sure he was not joking, as it seemed like madness. Coming into this dungeon on the first level meant losing one's life, but on the other hand, the captain was glad that their opponent was weak. Suddenly the boy raised his hand, pushing the captain's hand off his shoulder. He then said that he came to fight monsters, which made the team laugh. One of the guys said that with a level 1 he wouldn't be able to defeat even a level 2 healer, and his friend advised him to stay here and wait until the exit opens again. He was sure that newcomers had no business in secret areas, since they had no chance of winning, but the guy asked everyone to calm down and assured them that he would not get in the way. The captain suddenly said that if the kid was looking for death, he would not stop him, but he would face danger anyway. And when this happens, let the guy not expect them to help him. Having clearly defined their plan of action, the team went deeper into the dungeon, not taking the guy seriously. No one even turned in his direction except for the interested Chiang, who was the only one who saw some kind of catch. But soon the heroes reached the desired point where there were many monsters. The girl who possessed the power of fire confidently released it towards the approaching enemies. Her power created a huge fiery explosion that destroyed all the monsters near her with a shockwave. One of the guys, a brave archer, pulled the bowstring and shouted to the captain that he would cover him. At that moment, while the man was fighting with the huge spider, a second one jumped up from behind him and was instantly hit by the archer's arrow. The captain turned around and, looking confidently at his team member, thanked him and continued the fight. The second guy from the steel cutter slashed his spear at the monster with all his might, easily destroying it. The reborn Musk, looking at all this mess, stood calmly and watched the fight, remembering the old days. Suddenly Chang, who was also not participating in the battle, turned to him, saying that the captain had treated the boy too roughly. She told him not to take it to heart because he wanted the best after all. A newbie can easily make mistakes in secret areas. Chang added instructively that if the newcomer was not careful, he would be destroyed. The guy simply replied that compared to the old days, today's professionals have become more advanced and cautious. They gain all this experience through pain and tears, and this deserves respect. The girl noticed that although the guy is young, he speaks like the highest people of the Commonwealth. But he is right, because this is thanks to the fact that Musk, from scratch, organized a policy of intensive training of specialists promoting the division of labor and cooperation between professionals. Therefore, the mortality rate among low-level professionals began to fall, and many talented heroes appeared. Suddenly, the girl remembered that she had forgotten to introduce herself and, holding out her hand, added that her name was Chang Chiang and that she was a second-level healer. The guy happily shook her hand as a sign of introduction and introduced himself with his new name, Xiao Qiu. He also added that he is a first-level professional and has yet to choose a direction. Surprised, Chang asked the guy why he hadn't done it yet, but he replied that he was still thinking about it. Moreover, such directions as ranged combat, melee combat, mages, damage dealers, and others were created earlier by him. Chiang suddenly said that judging by the guy's physique, he was not suitable for the role of a close combat fighter, since usually only those as strong as their captain could withstand the attacks of monsters directly. The girl then asked if Xiao Qiu had taken the spirit test, adding that he could become a good cultivator, although they were not very durable. Suddenly, Chang suddenly fell silent and looked at the guy with fear, awkwardly saying that perhaps she was talking too much. Then out of nowhere, a sharp spider paw appeared, pointing straight at Chang Chang. Xiaoqiu instantly grabbed her hand and pulled the surprised girl to the side because she didn't even notice the danger. The spider's paw flew past and landed right on the rocky floor. Xiaoqiu barely managed to pull the girl towards him, saving her from the blow, although his eyes expressed complete calm. Suddenly, an archer from the team, noticing this, shouted out in fear that it was a shadow spider. Although the creature looked powerful and threatening, Xiao looked at it without the slightest sign of fear, while the girl's eyes were full of admiration. The monster rushed forward, but the newcomer, as if knowing his every step, attacked, his hands moving with incredible speed. He knew the monster's weak points, the places where the scales were thinner, and the vulnerable joints that could cause it to fall. Pulling himself together, he grabbed the monster's leg and with one movement of his hand was able to immobilize it, breaking it in half. Chang, clinging to the boy, looked at him with bewilderment, watching how he took the sharp paw like a spear. Xiao then raised it above his head to attack the huge spider lying below him. A second later, the monster collapsed to the ground, losing its strength and menacing expression, defeated by the newcomer. After this, the monster continued to make sounds for some time, but later became quiet, remaining lying on the stone floor. The guy remained in place, confident in his action, and silence reigned around, interrupted only by the sound of a falling body. The archer was surprised by such strong control over the body, as was the captain, because even for a martial artist this was too good. Suddenly one of the guys objected, saying that he had seen professional craftsmen, but even they were not capable of this. In an instant, the newcomer crushed the spider's most vulnerable leg and pierced the monster's body with it. This requires a clear understanding of the structure of the monster in your own body, and this guy was completely confident in his abilities. At this time, Chang looked at Xiaoqiu with delight and bewilderment, not believing that the one she considered inexperienced turned out to be so strong and brave. Suddenly the guy said that Chang could let him go now, since there was no more danger, otherwise she would soon strangle him. The girl suddenly felt incredibly awkward and jumped away from Xiao, covering her face with her hands and apologizing. The guy himself, smiling, realized that he received 500 experience points for destroying the monster, and that the chosen path of the monster does not affect the leveling system in any way. The system allowed him not to worry about gaining new levels, and he could also gain experience points for killing monsters. Thanks to this, he rose to the rank of a hero in his past life, and now he could also quickly upgrade the combat skills he had. Suddenly, the captain's voice broke off, apologizing for having been wrong and thinking the boy a fool for going into the dungeon all alone. He also thanked Xiao for saving Yang Chang and promised to share the reward with him after completing the mission. But the guy replied that it was just a friendly gesture, as it was perfectly normal to help others in secret areas. The captain hesitated because Xiao's speech was very saccharine, as if he was deliberately making himself look too correct, but he agreed with him. Soon the team continued on their way, destroying monsters. The captain's sword flashed in the darkness, cutting through enemies. Dodging the claws, the man deftly turned around and dealt a crushing blow to another monster. When the last monster fell, the team members stopped and began to loot them. But the captain knew that the fight was not over yet, as there was a dungeon boss ahead. He turned to the team and said that now they had to follow their original plan. The captain would take everything on himself and the rest of the team would attack. Since their enemy is a spider, the girl on their team must be ready to use fire techniques to burn away the web. The archer stretched and said that they were moving fast today, so when they got out, they might be able to make up the end of the century meeting, but his friend replied that there was no point in that. The end is so predetermined. This hypocritical mask will be found guilty. But the archer was curious about what he looked like under the mask. No one has been able to see his face, and the girl has even heard rumors that Musk is a woman, and she used to support him and consider him the salvation of humanity. But he suddenly destroyed everyone in Tuga City, and the trust in him disappeared. But Yang Qian did not agree with this and shouted out that it was not worth saying that. She heard that the city was then attacked by an infected demon that infected and turned all the people into monsters, and Mask had no other choice. The guy from the team chuckled at the fact that the girl was still supporting him, like a paid person from the internet. The captain decided to stop the advancing scum by reminding them why they were there. Moreover, he didn't see any reason for a fight, unless the guys wanted to put on a stand-up routine for the newcomer, but Zhao wasn't amused. Finally, the captain commanded everyone to move forward, saying that it was time to give this boss a beating. They continued their journey through the dark dungeon in search of the end point of their path to complete the mission. The webs around were growing larger, indicating that the boss was already close. The area really did look like a spider's nest, and all the team members hoped that they would get something valuable for destroying it. The archer suddenly said that he was more interested in what was inside the chest that the boss would be guarding. The fire mage added that it could be sold for a good price. Suddenly, the hunting team heard deep rustling sounds that foreshadowed danger. Everyone immediately prepared themselves as soon as they heard this and noticed the monster emerging from the shadows. He stopped in front of the captain, inspiring horror with his appearance and hungry gaze, growling angrily. The captain, without thinking, rushed into the attack, shouting for the crew to follow him. The battle erupted instantly, the captain delivering powerful blows while his comrades surrounded the monster using their skills and weapons. The hunters fought, dodging the attacks of the multi-legged monster. Each blow was decisive, each step was thought out. The team fought in unison, their screams and sounds of battle intertwined with the roar of the monster that rang out when one of the guys struck with a spear. Suddenly, one of the spider's limbs landed right next to Xiao, who remembered an important detail. In low-level secret areas, monsters have almost no intelligence, so you need to calculate your moves correctly. Xiao swung and hit the monster's leg, clearly realizing that he could get rid of it in one go if he aimed correctly. The girl and the archer attacked simultaneously at this time, releasing a stream of fire and arrows ignited by magical energy. The monster howled in pain, its limbs twitching in panic, and the hunting team felt a surge of confidence. At this time, Yan Qiang was helping the captain, restoring his energy with the power of a healer. The monster roared, and its limbs twitched in panic because it knew that soon it would end from such complex attacks. When this happened, the captain smiled and said that thanks to their teamwork, they had completed the third-level dungeon without any damage. He then added that he would distribute the final reward in the same way as last time, including Little Xiao. The guy himself wondered why the third-level dungeon was designated in the system as a fourth-level area. But there is something even stranger, and this thought was voiced out loud by one of the squad members, who said that the secret chest did not appear. Suddenly, the girl with the power of fire said that she thought she saw something coming. And indeed, soon all members of the squad heard the sound of bare feet approaching from the darkness. But what was their surprise when they saw a very young girl in front of them? However, the fire mage noticed that she was not just a girl, as there was something wrong with her head. Taking a closer look, she noticed that the girl, who was barely walking and trembling, was wearing an astronaut's helmet. The captain noted with surprise that if the chest hadn't appeared yet, then she might be the final boss. The girl stepped forward, her movements jerky and uneven, as if she was possessed by something more powerful. One of the team members took a spear and said that this girl wasn't that scary compared to the spider, so she wouldn't be a problem. But suddenly, as if someone had pressed a switch, two bright eyes lit up in the helmet, emitting a strange, frightening light. Her arms and legs, as if they didn't belong to her, began to move, just like she did, heading towards the hunters. At first she walked slowly and seemed uncertain, but then they became more confident, and the girl, as if possessed, ran towards the team. The guy with the spear immediately appeared in front of her, protecting the others, holding his weapon forward. He was already swinging his arm to strike, but his friend shouted that he was a fool because he was the boss after all. The archer added that she could easily dodge such a simple attack, being a strong monster. But his fears were unfounded because the spear struck the girl with astonishing ease and she froze in place, amazed. The guy, continuing to hold the spear in front of him, watched the actions of the strange girl, hanging limply on him. The entire team watched in surprise as the monster fell to the floor, defeated by their friend. The boy turned around and looked at his comrades, asking if it had been too easy. There was no answer, so he grabbed his spear more tightly and pulled it out of the monster. Right on the girl's stomach, a large hole was left gaping, from which a strange energy suddenly began to ooze. More and more of it stopped, and over time it became clear that it was a real web. She enveloped the surprised guy, who dropped his spear from his hands, clearly not expecting such a move. Suddenly, the girl in the helmet stood up and stared straight at the victim she had captured, a guy named Liao Qi. He already understood where this was going, but he couldn't do anything when the web suddenly pulled his hands, twisting them. The team members watching this didn't even have time to figure out what was happening when they heard their friend scream. Suddenly, the captain's voice was heard, saying that such a web could not be easily gotten rid of, and ordered the magician to use flame. The girl pulled herself together, stood in a stance, and directed her fiery energy straight at the web. Fiery energy burst from her hands with incredible force, trying to free her friend. When the flame met the girl releasing the web, there was a deafening crack and bright sparks flew into the air. Then the captain ordered the rest of the team to quickly save Liao Qi so that he would not come under fire, and an archer immediately rushed to help his friend. But suddenly, when he took a step, a whirlpool of fire appeared in front of him, swirling into a powerful vortex. Bright tongues of flame danced, threatening to engulf everything around, so the boy froze, not knowing how to help his friend. Suddenly, the archer noticed how the girl's legs in the helmet began to transform, and soon they turned into 8 powerful limbs. Liao Qi, unable to believe his eyes, wanted to retreat, but he could not, as he was enveloped in horror, and the strong web still did not let go of him. The girl in the helmet began to resemble a spider. Her body was enveloped in the same ominous light, and her eyes, under the helmet, sparkled, full of madness and strength. Now she looked not just strange, but truly dangerous. And even the captain himself said that he had never seen such bosses. The changed spider girl pulled the web that Liao Qi, whose arms were crippled, with an eerie calm. Suddenly the girl directed one of her powerful limbs straight towards him, piercing the web. Liao Qi's expression was one of horror and hopelessness as he realized that the spider's leg had pierced his body, leaving behind a trail of pain and fear. The guy, realizing that his life was hanging by a thread, tried to say something, but there was no longer any hope in his voice. The spider girl, with an eerie gleam in her eyes, extended her leg, and from the point of view of time, everything slowed down. The moment this terrible act took place seemed like an eternity, but the archer broke the silence, drawing his bow with fury to avenge his friend. But suddenly Xiao's hand touched him, stopping his blow, and the guy said that there was no need to act rashly. He then added that if you get closer, then from a boss with such power, an archer will get as much as a spearman on the ground. The guy got angry, but suddenly the captain said that Xiao was right, and they would not win if they attacked recklessly. Suddenly the captain turned to the magician and asked when the portal would open, but she sadly replied that only in 3 hours. Then the man, taking control of his will, said that all they could do was fight. And slowly make your way to the exit to leave as soon as the portal opens. Suddenly the archer shouted for everyone to be careful as the monster was starting to get closer. The girl again used the hole on her body to release webs from there, which looked very scary. A second later, a huge stream of her strong web headed straight towards the team members at a rapid speed. The captain, trying to defend himself, put out his hand, which was immediately covered in a layer of cobwebs. The archer, protecting his captain, fired 3 energy-charged arrows towards the monster. However, the monster did not pay any attention to this and released even more web in the direction of the arrows flying towards him. It acted as a shield, changing the trajectory of the arrows and continued to fly forward. Thus, she completely enveloped the archer, who was now unable to move and looked at the whole situation with horror. The captain immediately called Tulsea, who could not do anything and was pulled towards the monster. The web wrapped around him, and the boy, unable to resist, was drawn to the monster like a moth to fire. When he got close, strange, sharp points suddenly started to appear from the monster's belly. Limbs. These were teeth that seemed to form a mouth, and the archer realized that he was trapped. But it was too late. With horror, he realized that his life was hanging by a thread, and in the next moment, he could die. Suddenly, the teeth snapped shut, and the world around him went dark as the monster dealt with him as if it were just a light snack. The girls watched this scene in horror, their hearts filled with fear and hopelessness, and Yang Qiang even closed her eyes. The teeth clamped down on the boy's head, leaving no way to escape, and that only meant that his head was no longer his. This proved too easy for the monster's jaws, which threw the rest of the body aside. The captain, seeing what had happened, flared up with anger, and his face was distorted with rage, and he rushed forward, holding his sword in his hand, ready to strike. However, when he attacked, his sword missed, piercing the air, and the monster, anticipating the attack, protected itself with a powerful leg. The monster's limb was almost impossible to cut as it was too strong. The captain recoiled, realizing that the battle had become even more dangerous since it seemed impossible at all. How could a level 4 monster still be without a scratch after he, a level 3 swordsman, used all his power? At this time, the web that quickly wrapped around the captain's hand worked like a fishing rod, with the help of which the monster attracted victims. The captain, realizing that his life was in danger, decided that it was all over for him, since now he would be destroyed just like the archer. At this moment, Xiao's voice came from the shadows, quickly assessing the situation and, without thinking, shouting for a sword to be given to him. Holding out his hand, he shouted that the only way to save the captain was to cut off his hand, so if he wanted to live, then let him give him a sword. The captain was at first surprised and taken aback by such a terrible proposal, but realizing that he had no other choice, he resigned himself and decided to do as Xiao said. Swinging his sword, the captain threw it at the boy, clearly understanding that this was the only way to avoid ending up like Tulsea. Xiao grabbed the weapon, remained calm, and with concentration rushed forward. The boy jumped up, using all his strength, and aimed the sword at the target with precision and fearlessness. No one expected this, but the guy didn't even flinch, jumping up and pointing his sword at the hand wrapped in web. The captain cried out in pain, but at the same time felt himself being freed from the chokehold. However, what happened happened. and it was necessary to move on despite the pain. The monster hissed angrily as he saw the captain break free from his trap, ready for another attack. Meanwhile, Xiao, without wasting any time, grabbed the captain's hand and quickly led him away from the battlefield. Qiang used her power to heal the captain's wounds, her hands glowing with a soft light. However, another girl, overcome with fear and panic, decided that she no longer had the strength to fight, and she did not want to die here. She glanced back at the raging dungeon and, without waiting for everyone to gather, rushed towards the exit, leaving the team behind. Zhao, noticing her escape, silently looked after the girl, and then Qiang asked why the guy didn't run away too. But Xiao replied that there was no escape from this monster because it deliberately allowed its victim to escape, so that fear would be a real delicacy for it. The so-called chosen by the gods monsters feed on the negative emotions of ordinary people. Fear, jealousy, all this is exquisite food for them. Yang Qiang looked at the guy in surprise and asked, "What does chosen by the gods mean?" Xie replied that there were monsters that were chosen by the void gods, and after receiving the blessing, the monsters gained terrifying speed and strength. They also have a very strange appearance that goes beyond human understanding. In his past life, Xiao had destroyed countless chosen monsters and the void gods themselves. But just when he was deprived of all his power, he came across a monster chosen by the gods, as if the system had a bad sense of humor. Suddenly, the monster, enraged and full of rage, began to release a strange purple smoke from its belly. Qiang, seeing this, panicked because she knew that this smoke could be dangerous and quickly concentrated to use her magic. Gathering her strength, she cast a poison repellent spell, directing it towards all of the team members. But the smoke spread rapidly, and the poison even reached the escaped girl, who, feeling its influence, stopped, overcome with fear. However, when the girl inhaled the smoke, she realized that it was not a poisonous gas, but something else. Xiong suddenly realized that this was a spirit suppression spell, and dark images flashed through her mind, and fear and doubt began to take hold of her. The monster continued to release strange smoke from its belly, and clouds of foul-smelling fog filled the dungeon. However, the girl soon felt that not all members of the team were subject to her influence, which caused her burning eyes to look away in surprise. At that moment, Xiao's silhouette appeared from the shadows, and he was sure that the monster was confused, since the guy was the only one who didn't fall. He might not have the strength now, but his spirit was still at the 14th level, so the monster's spell was weak to him. Suddenly, a strange light appeared in Xiao's eyes, and a new, powerful energy could be felt around him. He took another step forward and realized that he had literally just gained a new ability. Xiao activated the monster status, and his physical body began to change, but he even thanked the monster for this. The boy's muscles filled with strength, and his skin acquired a smooth and dark texture as he transformed into a powerful monster. Xiao understood that if the monster hadn't knocked down the other guys, the guy wouldn't have been able to fight him for real. Being only chosen by the gods, the monster was given the opportunity to witness the birth of a new character, so let him be proud of it. The new form exuded confidence and power that was terrifying as Xiao became like a true demon. The monster, unwilling to give up, released even more overwhelming energy, enveloping the dungeon in a dark cloud. But for Xiao, this was too little. He felt a new strength and carefully watched the actions of the monster. However, to him, they seemed simply ridiculous compared to what he could do now. Xiao, full of energy, rushed to attack, and his speed was amazing and his movements were too precise. The monster was stunned by how quickly the guy was moving, and he didn't even have time to react before Xiao was already nearby. In a panic, to protect itself, the monster extended one of its 8 legs, trying to knock him out of the way. But Xiao, without wasting a second, pulled it out with incredible force, as if it were a light toy. The monster, dumbfounded that someone could harm him, looked at Xiao with disbelief and horror. The guy stood there holding the monster's severed leg in his hands, and determination burned in his eyes. However, the monster quickly came to its senses and again rushed to attack, full of rage and pain. Xiao, without wasting any time, threw what he called the monster's cute long leg to the side, preparing for the next step. In response, the monster released a stream of webbing, trying to grab him and bring him back under control. But the web flew past without reaching its target as Xiao confidently dodged. His speed and reaction were at their best. In the heat of battle, the monster lost sight of his opponent, not understanding where his victim was, and suddenly he heard the guy's voice. He scoffed, saying that these skills were primitive for the chosen one of the gods who had made a great mistake. Although Xiao may have high standards, this girl is only a level 4 monster, but still, let her not have any hope of continuing to exist. After these words, Xiao, in his terrifying form, soared into the air and with incredible strength and determination pounced on the monster. With every blow he dealt, the air around him shook and the power of his attacks made his enemy tremble. The monster, realizing its vulnerability, tried to defend itself, but Xiao was too fast and too strong, striking blow after blow. He attacked with great force, and soon the monster had only one leg left out of its 8 on which it could stand. Xiao, standing in front of his almost defeated opponent, couldn't help but mock, saying that with one leg the girl would have to hurry. The monster, overcome with fear, felt his confidence melt away, realizing with horror that he had lost most of his strength. The frightened girl started to run, hoping to escape the inevitable defeat. But Xiao was faster and rushed past her like a whirlwind, and at the last moment stopped her, depriving her of her last leg. The monster fell to the ground with a dull groan, and fear filled its eyes as the girl realized that her end was near. She stopped moving, lying on the ground because she could no longer get up and run away. Xiao walked up and stood over her, ready to deliver the finishing blow, knowing that victory would finally be his. She said that the girl, playing with people, probably didn't even think that she would ever be in their place. Filled with determination, Xiao raised his paw, preparing to deliver the finishing blow to the monster. With a loud crack, he brought his leg down, and the blow hit the target. The monster, who did not have time to react, was crushed with incredible force. Thus, the guy completed the mission, the reward for which was a spider's paw, after which the survivors were automatically teleported from the secret location. Thus, they found themselves in the city, after which more than 2 hours had already passed, but for Yang Qiang, who was walking along the street, it all seemed like a nightmare. After teleportation, having recovered from the suppression of the spirit, the captain, who received the most injuries, was immediately taken to the hospital. Yang Qiang and her sister had no injuries, so they were immediately released, but the girl was worried that she still hadn't seen Xiao Qiu. The girl did not believe that he could die, but suddenly she noticed a familiar figure near one of the posters. She couldn't be mistaken. Right in front of the cutie Qiang stood Xiao Qiu himself, carefully examining the contents of the sign with his eyes. Xiao himself, after suddenly teleporting from the dungeon, found himself in an unfamiliar city of Dahe. He looked around, realizing that he now needed to find a place to stay, but he quickly learned that housing prices here were sky high, as much as $3,000 a month for a room. Xiao frowned, realizing that in his previous life he didn't know how to look for a place to live because other people had done that before. While he was fighting monsters, he had no problems with money, but now he doesn't have a cent or anything. Suddenly the guy heard a familiar female voice and calmly turned his gaze to the girl who ran up to him. He immediately recognized the out-of-breath Yang Qiang as the same healer from the secret location. The girl thought with annoyance that Xiao didn't even remember her name, and yet she had introduced herself on the battlefield earlier. Then she said her name discontentedly for the second time, and even told how it was spelled correctly, adding that it could have been remembered. But then, calming down and exhaling, Yang Qiang said that she was glad that the boy remained safe and alive. Noticing the rental stand, the girl immediately asked if Xiao was looking for a place to live, and when he answered positively, she asked if the guy had any friends or relatives there. He replied that he had no one in this city, which made Yang Qiang think in surprise. She said that Dahe was built only after the cataclysm, so it is only 40 years old. However, due to rapid urbanization, the central area of the old city, which was once abandoned, has now become an urban-type settlement. Following these stories, Xiao and Yang Qiang walked around the districts a bit, looking at the surroundings that the girl had kindly told them about. Soon they reached a large and modern-style house, after which the girl said that it belonged to her. She smiled and added that Xiao would have his own room so that he wouldn't have to worry about causing inconvenience or anything. The boy was surprised by such kindness, but suddenly noticed a strange symbol on the wall. But Yang Qiang explained that it was a medal that her father received after his retirement. He was not only a hero, but also a professional level 5 warrior who had participated in many battles and possessed incredible strength. But what delighted the girl most was the information that her dad fought with Musk, lived with him in the same camp, and even ate from the same pot. However, he had told Yang Qiang and her sister about this since they were young, so she wasn't exactly sure whether it was true or not. Now, when the girl thinks about it, it seems like one big lie to her, and her dad likes to drink, and the words of a drunkard cannot be taken seriously. It's unlikely that Musk would share food with a low-ranking officer, and now he can't be asked because he's no longer there. The protracted war left painful wounds on the man, and they were not external, but drained his life force from within. Shortly before Yang Chang's father was removed from service, he passed away, and her mother passed away while giving birth to her sister. This story sounded too sad even for Xiaoqiu, who was surprised by the girl's cheerfulness in such a family situation. Suddenly, Yan Qiang smiled again and told the guy not to make such a face because this all happened many years ago, and she had already come to terms with it. She's definitely doing well now, so she invites Xiao to come over to have a look around. Already in the courtyard, the girl asked the guy to wait until she gave him bed linen, but he would have to get pajamas and underwear himself. Then, pointing to a room in the left wing, the girl said that it was free and Xiao could live there, but warned that the room and the things in it were old. The guy compared his previous constant life at the front to himself, and in comparison to it, this place was a piece of paradise. Xiao was determined to pay for his stay after he got the money, but suddenly he heard the sound of approaching wheels. A girl in a wheelchair suddenly came out to meet Xiao and, looking at the guy in surprise, asked who he was. At this point, Yang Qiang jumped up, telling Chanlu not to be afraid, introducing Xiao as her partner with whom they had passed the location and who had nowhere to stay in Dahe. Chanlu responded with suspicion that Xiao did not look like a member of her previous team, as if Yang Qiang had dragged him into the house of the first person you meet. Chanlu turned around in her wheelchair and rode away, clearly dissatisfied with her sister's behavior. Yang Qiang apologized for her sister, saying that she was a good person, she just didn't like strangers, so she was a little afraid of them. And today she's going to the trial of Musk, whom Chanlu idolized from the cradle, so she's acting more irritated.
Looking at Yang Qiang enthusiastically talking about Mask, Xiaoqiu never imagined that he had so many fans.
He really had no idea that Chanlu sat at her computer every evening and read news and comments related to Musk. Some supported him, saying that it would have been better to continue his policies, while others despised him and called him a runaway coward. These comments shocked Chanlu because she couldn't understand how most people could think that Musk had taken away human resources. On the contrary, it was humanity that put all the responsibility on Musk to survive in the dark times, so these stupid people should thank him. The heated argument in the comments was interrupted by a knock on the door and Yang Qiang's voice calling his sister to dinner. But Chanlu replied that she was busy and did not want to eat. However, Yang Qiang asked her to come down since they had a guest today. An enraged Chanlu replied that this guest was not Musk, so he was not worth her attention, and she was not happy to see him. Disappointed, Yang Qiang had no choice but to agree to her sister's conditions and go downstairs. Walking to the table, she told Xiao that they would be eating together today, and apologized in advance for the simple food. The guy, taking a piece of rice with his chopsticks, said contentedly that the food was very tasty and he wasn't lying at all. In the previous world, he had to eat monster meat without seasoning, rice, etc., since it was the only way to survive, and it felt like chewing metal with a bitter taste. Back then, Xiao always thought that as long as he was able to fight the darkness for the sake of humanity, any food, even the one that was difficult to swallow, would become delicious. Then, an interview with Professor Zhang began on TV, expressing his opinion about Musk's disappearance. The man was sure that the federal parliament was already making decisions on the matter, but strange hypotheses were appearing on the internet. According to them, Musk's disappearance is associated with escaping from crimes, and his agreement to give up all his powers was for the sake of show. And even if Musk had given up his power, he wouldn't have been able to disappear in front of thousands of people, but these are just hypotheses. Then the host added that Musk had put a lot of effort into fighting the monsters, so some are afraid that the hero's disappearance will negatively affect humanity. Some people think that humanity is seeking its own destruction, but for the professor, this sounded funny and impossible, since the reason that people have survived all these crises is one. They never relied on the power of one man, and their main organ is the parliament, thanks to which humanity achieved victories. Without planet Earth, the sun would still rotate as usual, and without Musk, humanity would still be able to move forward to glory. Listening to the professor's words, the surprised Yang Qiang didn't understand why everyone thought that it was really about Mask. She then decided to ask Xiaoqiu what he thought about it, but when she looked at the guy, she was surprised to see that he was helping himself to a fourth plate. Chewing rice, Xiao replied that, based on Musk's behavior alone, television was trying to suggest that he was hiding from crime. Yan Qing immediately retorted loudly, shouting that a hero like Musk must definitely have his own reasons. Xiao just continued to chew silently, striking the girl with his indifference, since she didn't understand how a guy could not care about a person like Musk. Yang Qiang then added that if Qianlu saw this program, she would probably smash the TV. Then, From behind the front door, screams and threats to the residents were suddenly heard, as if they would not be saved by the fact that they did not open the door and were hiding inside. Yang Qiang stood up from the table in alarm and shouted out that these were people from the Kaijiang Investment Company. Xiao looked at the door in surprise, the sounds from which did not stop, and the person standing behind it even threatened to burn the house to the ground. The girl, having finished talking with Xiao, suddenly turned sharply and ran out into the street. Her face took on a determined look, and she seemed to know what she was doing, but the fear inside was still there. Running up to the massive gates, she stopped and, with effort, opened the doors. The gates slowly opened, and behind them there were several angry men standing there with grins on their faces that were alarming. Yan Qiang immediately recognized them as Mr. Zan and Mr. Tujing, whom she had not opened the door to for a long time, but now she said once again that she was not going to sell her house. Tujing said in a relaxed tone that Miss didn't understand the whole situation because her team was disbanded today. Someone died, and the captain was almost fatally wounded. The girl asked in surprise how they knew about this, but Tujing brazenly replied that their company Kaijiang, as a VIP client, could easily obtain information through the state. So it's a pity that Miss Chang has no one else to rely on, so how does she plan to resist? The girl was a little confused and moved away from the annoying and disgusting man, although there was still confidence in her eyes. Then Tujing extended his palm forward and said that he was giving the sisters another 5 days to think about it. Otherwise, things would be decided differently. If Yan Qiang decides to give this land to develop their company, then $100,000 will immediately appear in her bank account. Surprised, Yang Qiang asked why it was so low, since it used to be $3 million, and it was strange that the price had dropped so much despite the fact that she had no intention of selling the house anyway. Tujing, smiling cheekily, replied that the real estate market is in constant flux, and such a drop in prices is absolutely normal. Or is this not enough for Miss Chang? After all, the girl needs at least $30,000 to maintain her sister's health. Suddenly, Tujing's monologue was abruptly interrupted after he saw Xiao come out of the house. Tujing immediately rushed forward, entering the courtyard, assuming that this guy was Yang Qiang. Even though Tujing thought she liked older guys, he still extended his hand to Xiao to introduce himself. Tujing Kenzo introduced himself and added that he worked as the head of the security department at Kaijiang Investment Company. This text seemed to be memorized, but this did not embarrass Xiao, who calmly extended his hand in response to the greeting. However, as soon as the boy touched Tujing's hand, he immediately heard Yang Chang's worried cry. She warned that Tujing was a mage who specialized in mental attacks. Xiao, ignoring Yang Chang's warning, decisively shook the man's hand, immediately feeling his strength. Tujing, with a smirk on his face, seemed confident in his ability to control the minds of others. Xiao felt a cold energy penetrate his consciousness, and he realized that he was trying to establish a mental connection. Tujing confidently said that the guy was caught, delving deeper into Xiao's consciousness, trying to get through his thoughts and emotions. The guy's gaze remained absolutely calm because he was not a simple opponent. Tujing was sure that once he reached this guy's subconscious, his mind would be destroyed. The man was in a good mood, so he was only determined to give his opponent a slight concussion. He was sure that this attack would leave Xiao in bed for at least half a month, but the further he went, the more he felt himself getting lost. There were no thoughts or memories in this mental labyrinth, which shocked Tujing. There was only a surface of water around him because Xiao's mental strength was incredibly high. Suddenly the man realized that he was lost. The flow of energy that he expected to control had become uncontrollable, and instead of going deeper, he found himself drawn into his own darkness of fear, so he decided to run. However, Xiao, using his abilities, not only protected his consciousness, but also began to attack. At that moment, a huge wave formed in front of Tujing and hung over him like a tsunami. It was not only a physical battle, but also a mental one, and it was here that Xiao was able to gain the upper hand. Now the man was trapped and realized that he had made a mistake already underwater because the guy's level was completely different. At that moment, Tujing began to be absorbed by Xiao's mental powers like a powerful whirlwind, sucking in everything in its path. The man, immersed in this stream, suddenly saw something terrifying in front of him. At the bottom of his mind, an image of a monster arose whose evil gaze distorted the space around him. Horror gripped the man and he screamed, his voice echoing throughout the mental space. Suddenly, Tujing collapsed to the ground in reality, foaming at the mouth, and his body, as if it had lost its strength, trembled from internal shock. Yang Kong herself was very surprised and scared, not understanding what had happened, thinking that the man was pretending because his attacks had not worked. One of the guards stood up in all seriousness and furiously attacked Xiao, being sure that this was his doing. But suddenly Mr. Zhang grabbed his arm, stopping the big guy's crushing blow. The guard turned around angrily, but Zhang Kaijie told the guard to at least think for himself a little because even Tu Jing couldn't stand up to this kid. If he was able to knock out such a strong magician, then he is probably a second or even third-level professional. Zhang Kaijie leaned towards his friend and said that they had underestimated Yang Qiang because they did not expect her to find such a strong patron. Having loaded Tujin onto his shoulder, the man added that it was not over yet, and if the guy harmed them again, he would not get away with it. After those people left, Yang Qiang turned around and looked at Xiao, asking in surprise, was it he who knocked out Tu Jing? Xia replied that yes and no, because he didn't want to interfere. But this man persistently tried to penetrate his subconscious, which the guy couldn't allow. He asked Yang Qiang how long these scoundrels had been torturing her, and the girl sadly replied that it had been about 4 years, right after her father died. However, they had no intention of selling the house, but these people kept trying to break in and even intimidated poor Qianlu. Fortunately, 2 years ago, Yan Qiang became a second-tier professional and joined Captain Song's team, who secretly threatened these people. And until the captain was hospitalized, they didn't come here. But they came as soon as they learned about Sun's condition. Xiao then asked why the government didn't help soldiers like Yang Qiang in need. After all, Xiao himself was the one who promoted the policy of special treatment for military families in the past, but apparently, then these guys definitely wouldn't have come here. Yan Qiang only sadly replied that it was more profitable for the state to be on the side of those who bring in income, like the Kaijiang Company, rather than fight for the rights of the weak. Then Xiao added that if this was really the case, then the girl should not do this. After entering back into the house, Xiao decided to help Yang Qiang wash the dishes after an interesting dinner, continuing the conversation. The guy was telling me that he was once told that if someone helped you, you should do everything possible to show your gratitude. Now he lives in Yang Qiang's house and eats her food, so he thinks he should at least help by washing the dishes, to which the girl replied that Xiao has already helped her a lot. If he hadn't forced those people to leave, she didn't even know how it would have ended. But now, she wondered what Xiao was planning to do next. The guy replied that he would be clearing out the secret areas and asked what about Yang Qiang, but she replied that she only hoped that the captain would recover soon. Without him, she will have no choice but to look for a new good team, and this is difficult, since they usually compete with each other using lies and betrayal. Although, according to Musk, federal law has established a ban on the destruction of people in classified areas, no one monitors this. Suddenly, Yang Qiang smiled and said that if she found a good team, she would definitely offer Xiaoqiu to them. The guy agreed, more for the sake of decency, because he understood what he was getting into by agreeing to the path of a monster. No one will fight side by side with the monster, not now, and especially not in the future. Suddenly, a notification about a new mission appeared in front of Xiao, described as a simple task for which there is a chance to receive unexpected bonuses. It was a level 4 secret area that had to be cleared alone, and the preparation time was 12 hours. Xiao, having collected his thoughts, finally agreed to the mission and activated the teleportation. The next moment, a bright portal built into the system opened, thanks to which Xiao was able to avoid punishment from the parliament and immediately enter the secret realm. When the light dissipated, the silhouette of the Pare appeared, who found himself in a new secret kingdom, which surprised him with its atmosphere. Stone walls rise up around it, as if from the Middle Ages, forming narrow paved corridors. Particularly eye-catching were the gargoyle statues that decorated the room, as if from medieval Europe. These stone creatures, with their curved shapes and sinister faces, seemed alive, as if they were guarding this place from intruders. They looked at Xiao with motionless sternness, as if they knew his goal and intentions. Suddenly the boy noticed how the gargoyles, which until then had seemed like motionless stone statues, began to move slowly. At first, these were barely noticeable movements, but suddenly their heavy stone bodies began to move more quickly. It turned out that these were level 3 scarlet gargoyles, which usually looked like stone sculptures. But as soon as a living organism appears nearby, their true essence is revealed. And at that moment, a light comes on in their eyes. The stone body provided them with high strength, and the protruding fangs posed a mortal danger to the enemy. Xiao immediately realized that monsters like gargoyles had rough skin and a thick layer of flesh, and they were also susceptible to natural magic. Xiao thought with annoyance that if Yang Qiang's squad had encountered this creature, they would have suffered heavy losses. Suddenly the gargoyles, revived and full of rage, suddenly rushed at Xiao with muffled cries. Xiao instantly, without wasting any time, began to change, taking on his half-monstrous form. His muscles grew and he quickly grabbed the nearest gargoyle, but her heavy body was no match for him. Smiling slyly, Zhao added that, unfortunately for the gargoyles, he was not one of the squad members. Using his power, he easily lifted the monsters into the air and delivered a blow that was very powerful. In the blink of an eye, Xiao dealt with the monsters and confidently moved on, ready to face new challenges. Soon, Xiao stepped into a huge hall with high ceilings. It was shrouded in thick smoke through which light penetrated from the stained glass windows. In this semi-darkness, the guy saw many gargoyles that were slowly emerging from the fog. Their sinister eyes glittered like coals, and the monsters surrounded Xiao, ready to attack. And it seemed like their numbers had no limit. Xiao, sensing the tension in the air, pulled himself together and confidently called on the gargoyles to attack all at once. The gargoyles, hearing his words, rushed forward, their wings rustling and their claws scraping on the stone floor. Xiao, watching them move rapidly around him like a whirlpool, was ready to attack. He crouched down, gathering his strength, and at that moment he felt the energy building up inside him. Suddenly, with a powerful jerk, Xiao flew into the air, scattering the gargoyles like flies. As soon as he stood up, his eyes turned into bright lanterns symbolizing rage. The guy began to destroy the gargoyles like a whirlwind, and his every move was graceful and destructive. He rushed between them, delivering blows that tore the stone bodies into pieces. The gargoyles tried to attack Xiao, but their efforts were in vain, and the sounds of destruction continued to echo through the air. Xiao, continuing his attack, felt powerful and confident. He was not just a monster, but a force capable of crushing any evil. Soon the hall was filled with rubble falling from the destroyed monsters. When the last gargoyle remained, Xiao grabbed onto its wings, preventing it from escaping. Suddenly, the monster turned and looked at his enemy with angry and frightened eyes. This surprised Xiao because he knew and remembered that gargoyles had no feelings, so these emotions did not stop him. Grasping the monster's wings tighter, Xiao pulled them in different directions, and the rocks began to crack. In the end, nothing remained of the last gargoyle except scraps of stone. But suddenly, after the battle with the last gargoyle, the ceiling of the hall collapsed with a dull crash next to Xiao. Dust and debris rained down, and a strange figure suddenly emerged from the hole. Thus, a huge level 4 gargoyle leader was born, which was different from ordinary gargoyles since the creator put a lot of effort into it. This was evident from the appearance, as the leader's massive body was graceful and strong. Xiao was surprised to notice that although the leader was a monster, he looked like a human, and his body was also human. But because of this, the guy had an even greater desire to destroy this creature. With a sharp spear and confidence, the monster rushed at Xiao, and the guy, preparing for a new fight, rushed towards him. After some time, when the dangerous fight was already over and silence reigned in the hall, footsteps were suddenly heard outside the door. Suddenly someone hit the door, kicking it with great force, so the door gave way. There was another team of warriors on the program, consisting of 4 people, full of determination. But what was their surprise when they saw a hall full of stones, and not a single enemy in this area? One of the guys asked the commander if they were the first squad to enter here since this kingdom had only appeared 12 hours ago. The commander replied that this was indeed the case because the people from the Special Bureau had promised him that this place had been sealed before their arrival. Then a girl from the squad called the commander and said that someone had definitely been here before them, and he was incredibly strong. The commander approached the girl who was sitting above 2 rifts and said that such a structure usually formed when close combat professionals fought. Moreover, they used some blunt object, but usually such large fragments are not left from the blow. Therefore, the girl added with fear in her eyes that this meant one thing. Someone had torn this gargoyle to pieces like a rag. The commander, hearing this, was shocked, because he could not believe that this was possible because it required enormous strength. But then, one of the guys from the squad shouted that now he had no doubts about it and pointed his finger at one of the columns. Everyone turned around and looked in the direction indicated, and what they saw shocked them. On the column, nailed with a spear, hung the leader of the gargoyle, who certainly could not harm anyone. This amazed the warriors, who returned to Dahe and reported everything to the Secret Area's Control Bureau. The bureau chief threw the stack of papers on the table in a rage, outraged that no one had yet corrected this mistake. At least 7 teams reported that upon entering the dungeon they found that it had been cleared by someone before them, and half of the monsters were already gone. Some team or individual has escaped their bureau's monitoring and entered the secret area without registering. Here, one of the employees asked doubtfully whether this was really bad, since in any case these areas would be declassified by someone. The man screamed angrily and slammed the table, cursing loudly, saying that at the very least this meant that one parasite had secretly helped another to enter the dungeons. This is an abuse of power, and at worst, the entire Federation and humanity could be under threat. The problem is not that the stranger is destroying monsters, but that the new generation did not live through the wild times when there was no control bureau. And the most common cause of death when entering a dungeon is not an attack by monsters, but death at the hands of your own comrades. People should not die because of senseless conflicts that can arise because of such parasites and their assistants. But suddenly, abruptly gathering himself, the man returned to the matter, saying that the first dungeon was the 4th level gargoyle kingdom, which meant that someone above level 4 had entered there. Then, one of the girls at the table asked why the chief was so sure that it was one person, to which the man replied that this could be judged by the wounds of the monsters. All of them, judging by the data from the scene, were left by one person, so this person will not be able to use all of the trophies obtained. Then the leader stood up and shouted out an order that everyone should monitor the professional market in all of Dahe and report back if they heard about a trophy from those 7 dungeons being sold. The subordinates accepted the order and began to monitor the professional market in Dahe City. This is where everyone sold their trophies, and Xiao was no exception, finding a merchant who paid well for them. The guy took the money and thought that, judging by the merchant's appearance, he had sold the items cheaply again. But in any case, the guy doesn't really need the materials he received from secret areas. While he was carrying out the system's tasks, his physical strength grew, and even now, a new task appeared: passing the gallery of night dwellers. But now, Xiao was thinking that the money he got from the mission should be enough to pay Yang Chang's rent. Suddenly he heard a familiar voice at the next bench and turned his head to the side. There stood Yang Chang, showing the merchant a sword that looked old, but because it had been well preserved, it was very sharp. The merchant replied that the blade was full of cracks and was also very thin and could break soon, but it could be sold for scrap metal. The despairing Yang Chang looked at the sword with regret, and stopping mid-sentence realized that her father's sword had been called scrap metal. But then the merchant took pity and said that he would add 3,500 for the sword, but no more, which also seemed like pennies. The girl looked at the sword that Feia had called her with pity and said that she didn't want to do it, but Qianliu's medical expenses were too high. The cunning merchant looked at the sad Yang Chang and thought that she really didn't understand anything, and he had 30 years of experience. This sword contains forged carbon iron, a very valuable material that can be extracted and earned tens of thousands. Therefore the merchant hurried the girl, telling her that soon he would not take the sword even for 3,500, brazenly deceiving her. But just when Yang Chang was about to hand over the sword, she heard someone shout at her to stop. Turning around, the girl saw Xiao Qiu and asked what he was selling here, but the guy replied that he would tell her about it later. Right now, he was interested in the sword of a level S professional, which at first glance was ordinary, but it contained a special metal. This piece of metal was once stained with the blood of an evil deity, so this sword is actually very expensive. Therefore Xiao, looking closely at the girl, said that he wanted to buy this sword, which greatly surprised Yang Chang. Here the disgruntled merchant intervened, shouting that he had already made an agreement with this girl and that he couldn't interfere like that. But Xiao, not listening to the impudent man, held out his entire stack of money, adding that it was still not enough. The merchant, looking at this, hit himself on the forehead in disappointment, because now he had lost a great deal. As Xiao and Yang Chang walked out of the market into a deserted area and found a place to sit down and rest. Yang Chang immediately handed half the amount to Xiao and said that the sword would cost less for him, since the guy had already saved her more than once. But Xiao waved it off, saying that the girl had already provided him with housing, and this was already payment for saving him, and this money was for rent and very tasty food. Moreover, this sword is not as simple as it seems, and although Xiao couldn't tell all the details now, its value is much higher than Yang Chang thinks. The girl looked at Xiao thoughtfully and said that she didn't expect that the sword she had kept since childhood would be as mysterious as Xiao Qiu himself. The guy got out of the secret area with the spider before everyone else and earned a large sum of money too quickly, but he shouldn't worry, since Yang Chang won't ask him about these secrets. She didn't want to pry into the boy's affairs or tell anyone about them, but let him just treat the Feia sword well, because it was the only thing they got from their father. Xiao, looking at the sword, thought that its name meant a soaring raven, as free in movement and hidden in the darkness as a raven. Then Yang Chang's sad voice rang out, saying that she was the most worthless daughter who failed to protect her father's last thing. But this is to treat Qianliu, who was injured in the great demon disaster in Dahe. Xiao heard about her that a level 10 monster broke out from a secret area. It was a great demon, and neither the city army nor the professional warrior could stand before it. And everyone, registered professionals and retired military men, participated in this battle. It was thanks to them that many ordinary people were able to reach a safe place, but their father also died in this battle, and only Fei Ya remained from him. The demon's most deadly attack was its radiation, where everything turned green, covering half of the city. The normal people nearby turned into puddles of blood and flesh, and Qianlu's legs were hit by the radiation at the very border. She had a talent for swordsmanship, and at school she could cut down a grown man with a wooden sword, and their dad said that Qianlu was like she was born with a sword. Everyone thought that she would become a level 5 warrior or higher like her father, but because of the demon, she is now being treated by the best doctors, otherwise the radiation will spread and destroy her. And Yanqiang herself has now abandoned close combat and chosen the profession of a healer with the highest survival rate. Listening to this, Xiaoqi remembered that he was called back from the front lines when the demon was rampaging for about 10 hours, and it was surprising that such a weak monster had such a strong impact on people, which was why Xiaoqiu hated monsters. Then he recalled that after this incident, Musk had agreed with the government to give money to each victim. But the girl looked at Xiao in surprise and asked, was that really true? Anyway, after Yanqiang had spoken out, she felt a little better, so she stood up and called Xiao home. He himself said that she cooks rice deliciously, and now it's time to show her real level. The girl then ran forward, and Xiaoqiu calmly followed her, passing along the path past 2 mysterious people in suits. These were the people from the bureau who were looking around carefully, trying to find this parasite, not realizing that he had just passed by. The second man suddenly said that, based on the analysis of the chapter, this is the best place to sell stolen goods. Moreover, colleagues are already exploring all the underground points, so they need to hurry and search everything quickly. And while the law enforcement officers were looking for the parasite, evening fell in the city, and it also descended on Yang Changqiang's house. Now there was only Qianlu in it, who was determined to wage war in the comments for Musk's honor. Suddenly the girl heard a loud knock on the door, and concluding that it was neither her sister nor a strange stranger living in their house, she became scared. After all, she realized that these could only be representatives of the investment company Kaijiang. There was a continuing loud knocking at the door, and sounds like hammer blows echoed throughout the room. The girl in the wheelchair, feeling the growing tension, shuddered in fear but quickly pulled herself together. The look of worry disappeared from her face as she looked at her wooden sword standing in the corner. Qianlu bravely grabbed it and, holding it tightly in her right hand, rode toward the door. She placed the sword right in front of her, realizing that this could be her only salvation. At this moment, one of the representatives from the Kaijiang company kicked down the door with a bang and entered the room with a brazen grin on his face. His confidence was almost tangible when he said that he knew someone was there. Then he walked mockingly towards the little invalid holding a wooden sword. He looked at this flawed thing and laughed, saying that this definitely wouldn't defeat him. But Qianlu, gathering all her determination, tried to get up from the wheelchair and swung the wooden sword. But of course, she missed, and the next moment she lost her balance, falling to the ground. The hard impact with the floor made her heart beat faster as she felt like a helpless object of ridicule. Anger washed over Qianlu as she clutched the sword in her hand, feeling useless and only able to utter a few negative words. However, at that moment, the enraged man's boot stepped on her sword, blocking her view. His grin grew even more smug as he looked down and asked, was this invalid really going to chop up a man who was standing firmly on his feet? The next second, he ordered his men to search the house and find Yanqiang and that fool who dared to attack their squad. Now they will show him what it means to offend the wrong people, because the members of the company looking for the guy smashed everything around the house. Then one of them approached the commander and said that they had searched all the rooms, but those two were nowhere to be found. Even though they were late, the man promised Qianlu, who was lying on the ground, that they would not be the losers, and ordered her to take the girl with them, calling her trash. But the others were afraid of this order because it was already a kidnapping, and they were not allowed to make noise. The commander agreed, but did not want to leave just like that. Then he turned to one of his subordinates, who was more interested in the matter, and gave him a special order. After that, he handed the guy the car keys and told him to wait until Yanqiang and that scoundrel returned so he could drive the car into the yard. It will just be a minor accident due to a car malfunction, inside which will be gifts in the form of bags of trash from all over the area. After all, they are law-abiding citizens who do nothing wrong, and so everyone agreed to this plan. Soon the clouds thickened so much that rain began, which turned into a downpour with thunderstorms. The rain was pouring down and thunder was booming overhead, as if warning that something bad had happened. Yanqiang ran, covering her head with a sweater, trying to quickly get home with Xiao and take shelter from the bad weather. But when they got there, the girl saw the broken gate to her yard, and her heart began to beat faster with anxiety. Her sister and her overturned wheelchair lay on the ground in the heavy rain. She was still holding the wooden sword, but her body was motionless, and her expression was angry and full of aggression. At this moment, anxiety and fear overwhelmed Yang Qiang, and without thinking, she rushed towards her sister. Xiao, following behind her, also decided to help, lifting and adjusting the wheelchair while listening to Qianliu talk about Kaijiang Company. Yang Qiang, after sitting her sister down, asked Xiao to take her into the house while she collected things from the yard, otherwise everything would be useless. The guy took the stroller and rolled it towards the door while the furious Yang Qiang headed towards the exit, but suddenly Xiao stopped along with Qianliu as they heard a very loud sound of something falling very close. The guy looked to the side with just his eyes and saw a terrifying and annoying picture. Right in front of the exit, Yang Qiang stood in a huge pile of garbage that seemed to have fallen out of nowhere and blocked the exit from the courtyard. The girl didn't say a word and her expression remained indifferent, only her fists clenched tighter. The man driving the garbage truck laughed and shouted that he himself didn't know how the garbage ended up on Miss Chang's house. Although, it's even good that it's raining now, because then they'll be able to wash themselves properly. As he was leaving the gate, the guy shouted out that this was the first lesson from the Kaijiang Company. Qianliu, looking at her sister's condition, knew that this would not end well and became very worried. Suddenly, she felt Xiao grab the handles of her chair and start to pull her into the house. Qianliu immediately asked him to stop, saying that she had to help her sister, but Xiao interrupted her. He said that Yang Qiang should sort things out herself, and if Qianliu went there, it would only make things worse. Looking at the annoyed Yang Qiang, it was difficult to understand what exactly and to what extent she was feeling, since her steps were calm. She walked past her sister in despair, unable to stop and look at her. Every step was difficult, as if a heavy load was falling on her shoulders, and even the thunderstorm and downpour were unimportant to her. Yan Qiang hated what had happened, that she had ended up in this situation, that her sister had suffered, and that they had both ended up in this position. Qianliu felt the same way, and standing next to Xiao, asked why everything was happening like this. Will no one explain this to her? She asked Xiao if there was any justice in this world at all. Xiao, looking forward, calmly replied that he had never met her. Then the girl asked if she would be in the future, to which she received an equally sharp negative answer. Then Qianliu asked about humanity, because there must be humanity, since all great people must want to create an honest world. Xiao only replied that Qianliu's worldview was false and his ideals were counterfeit because even this rain fell differently for everyone. It falls on both the poor and the dishonest, and each one feels it in his own way. This world is unfair in itself, so standing in the rain of this unfair world is also unfair. The rage that filled Xiao's mind caused him to squeeze Qianliu's wooden sword in his hand, breaking it in half. The girl, either from the sword or from everything Xiao said above, or rather from everything together, broke down and began to sob loudly. But Xiao added that he was not interested in their family's problems, but he did sympathize with them, and at first, he had no intention of interfering with these problems and injustice. He should have saved his energy for more important things, but it turned out that his sister's problems came to him too, and it was a real headache. Suddenly, Qianliu shouted at the soaking wet Xiao, who was leaving the courtyard. What was he going to do? Xiao suddenly opened his eyes, and with a look and voice full of confidence, he replied that he wanted to deal with these scoundrels. Qianliu immediately shouted that the guy had gone crazy because the thugs of the Kaijiang Company were not just small fry, but level 3 and 4 professionals, and their leader, according to rumors, had even reached level 5. Moreover, Xiao himself said that he was bored with these problems, which would cause big problems later, so it was better for him not to go and interfere. But Xiao was determined. He looked at his new sword and said that problems were really boring. But he always liked to get rid of boredom in different ways and destroy his problems. And if this situation has already become so vivid and influencing his life, then he will get rid of this problem and at the same time have a good time. So Xiao, despite the rain, walked towards the Kaijiang Company, his steps confident and purposeful. Water was spilling around him, but he didn't pay attention to it. His thoughts were focused on the goal. As he approached the building, 2 members of the company emerged from it, casually discussing investments, cooperation, and enrichment. Their conversation was full of enthusiasm, and they did not notice the guy standing alone in the rain who had a sword in his hand instead of an umbrella. This weapon had reaped the brunt of countless casualties on the battlefield and needed to be awakened by the blood of the enemy. With this purpose, The guy went into a beautiful building, illuminated by expensive lamps, where there were a large number of people. One of the men immediately noticed Xiao, as he looked like he didn't fit in with the general surroundings at all. Wet, in a blue jacket and holding a long bloody sword in his hands, in which, perhaps, the spirit of a demon slept. The guy definitely aroused suspicion. The guards looked at Xiao with a relaxed expression, thinking that he had simply come to cause a scandal again, and they only regretted that it happened during their shift. They approached Xiao and, ignorantly turning to him, told him to put away his weapon because he probably didn't even know where he came. But Xiao didn't listen to them and walked forward, to which the disgruntled guard shouted at him to stop and began to approach. However, Xiao, in a completely skillful and unnoticeable manner, simply passing by, managed to deliver fatal blows. At first, the man didn't even understand what had happened, but suddenly he felt a sharp pain from the fact that he was falling apart into pieces. Thus, the blood-sacrificial demon sword was activated, and according to the new mission, all hostile creatures had to be destroyed with Feiya. As a reward, the sword will complete its evolution thanks to the blood and become the most powerful weapon. Xiao was ready to carry out the mission, especially when he saw new enemies coming out of the elevator. His sword moved with great speed, striking everyone who attacked the boy. One by one, people fell, and Xiao left behind a trail of bodies and scarlet liquid. Then one of the guards shouted that the guy was hostile and ordered everyone to be careful. So Xiao Kuo was surrounded by 4 armed warriors ready to attack at any moment, but the guy remained calm. Suddenly the warriors rushed forward, each of them striving to deliver a crushing blow. But Xiao, as if in slow motion, repelled their attacks with incredible agility. His movements were graceful and precise, and there was not a trace of worry on his face. So with one powerful movement of the sword, he knocked out his opponents. The warriors were defeated in the blink of an eye. However, one of them, noticing that his comrades had been defeated, decided to act cunningly and approach from behind. But Xiao, with his keen sense of intuition, noticed the approaching threat. At that very moment, without wasting any time, he turned around and struck his sword with all his might at the surprised enemy. The sword flashed in the air, and the moment it met the enemy's hand, a sharp sound was heard. The man screamed in pain and stepped back, but Xiao, not stopping there, continued to attack. The situation was under control, and Xiao was ready to continue the fight if a new threat appeared. So he used his sword again to fatally attack one of the warriors who attacked him. Then one of the guys noticed that Xiao's sword was stuck, and this was a great chance for him to attack. Then the guy rushed towards Xiao, raising his sword over his head, and wanted to attack him from behind. But then one of Xiao's hands let go of the hilt of his sword, and the guy put it to the side. Thus the enemy ran straight into the hand, which managed to deal a fatal blow to him. The last thing the man thought was that Xiao was clearly a weapons pro, otherwise why were his fists stronger than his body system? However, that was the last question the man asked himself before his body fell to the floor. So Xiao was able to move forward without attacking those who did not resist and ran away from him in fear. He moved towards the room where the 3 company heads were sitting, one of whom, Li Rongqi, was talking about how he would soon take the house of the 2 sisters in Laocheng district by any means necessary. His companion supported his friend, saying that these lands could be developed and sold for a lot of money. Then suddenly a young guy burst into the room and shouted that they had an emergency. All 3 companions looked boredly at the guy, who said with horror in his eyes that a real killer had come to them. He had started a massacre in the main hall and had already destroyed many fighters, and what was outrageous for the heads of the corporation, there was only one of him. Only Li Rongqi thought in fear that he had not checked his target well enough, who might be a powerful professional or a person in power. They don't touch such strong opponents, so it was necessary to check what kind of killer it was and who he came from. Taking his axe-shaped weapon, Li Rongqi and his companions walked out of the room. They headed straight to the scene of all the bacchanalia to deal with the impudent fellow who most likely has a second life since he is so brave. Suddenly, the men noticed something strange on the landing, and their attention was drawn to a sound. There stood a guy, helplessly raising his hands up and tearfully begging for them to leave him alone and let him go. But then, one swing of the sword decided everything, and in response to his prayers there was only a cold and sharp blow. The sword flashed in the air, and the next moment the boy's body fell lifelessly onto the cold floor, and behind him Xiao's figure appeared from the shadows. His presence filled the space with tension as Xiao's gaze was full of rage. His insensitive, the expression on his face, which contrasted with the chaos around him, struck fear into the heads of the company standing before him. They felt cold sweat break out on their foreheads, but then Li Rongqi seemed to remind them that they were level 4 professionals and had nothing to fear. They decided to fight together, each using their own strength. ice magic, the power of a huge weapon in the form of an axe and 2 pistols, clearly aimed at the enemy. The level 4 pros started threatening, saying that if the guy surrendered himself, they wouldn't touch his body, but honestly, they still didn't understand why their company didn't please Xiao. Suddenly, one of the guys turned to the leader and said that this guy was Yang Chang's new friend, and it was because of him that their guys suffered. Suddenly, Xiao's voice rang out saying that since there were 3 level 4 professionals here, it would be difficult for him to maintain his human form. Suddenly, in an instant, the guy's sword swung and touched the switch, causing the light in the room to go out. The leader and his subordinates began to worry as they could not see what was happening in front of them. They didn't understand what Xiao was going to do, assuming that the guy wanted to suddenly attack them in the dark. There may be bandits who become stronger in the dark, but for one of the men it was an advantage. He activated the Twilight Vision skill, which allowed him to see in the dark as if it were daytime. But it would have been better if he hadn't seen anything further, because the first thing that caught his eye were the terrible paws of an unknown monster. Looking up, the man saw the silhouette of a monster in the semi-dark space. His body was muscular, and his eyes glowed with an ominous light like 2 bright torches reflecting the thirst for destruction. It was raining, and the drops were hitting the roof of the building, creating a dull sound that added to the tension in the air. The man with the pistols, his hands shaking with fear, looked in fear at the monster that stood in front of him. They stood for a long time, as if time stood still, each of them waiting for what would happen next. Suddenly, the monster, like a released spring, rushed forward with incredible speed. The man tried to take aim, but his nerves were failing him. The pistols were shaking in his hands. At that moment, there was a sharp sound, and a sword flashed through the air and struck Joseph. The man let out a strangled cry, and his body, like a slow-motion animation, began to fall to the floor. At this moment, Li Rongqi, who was at the other end of the room, smelled a strong smell of blood. He turned around in horror as he felt his comrade collapse, filling the space with the tragedy unfolding before his eyes. The storm continued, lightning illuminating the scene of horror that was taking place in the Kaijiang company. The monster, surrounded by a whirlwind of bright flashes, approached the second man with terrible intent. Suddenly, the monster raised its sword, quickly lowering it down, but Li Rongqi managed to notice the approaching threat. He instantly defended himself with an axe, but his hand shook from the force of the blow, causing fear. The man understood that if he didn't react in time and missed the blow, he would die from this sword. Meanwhile, another man was standing in the shadows, watching what was happening. He, realizing the danger of the situation, concentrated and released an ice block towards the monster, using the art of the ice environment. The monster, sensing the approaching ice block, reacted instantly. He extended his hand forward as if he could stop a huge piece of ice with his palm. But suddenly, as if an invisible force stopped the block in the air, hanging motionless for a moment. The next moment, the block shattered into pieces, ice shards scattering around like pieces of fragile glass breaking on the floor. This act only angered the monster, who did not like sneaky attacks from behind. His red eyes, full of rage, turned to the enemy who dared to attack him. There was tension in the air, and at that moment a strange sound was heard, like a harbinger of destruction, a dull, ominous crack. It made the hairs on the back of Li Rongqi's neck stand on end, and he froze in anticipation, preparing for what was to come next. With fearful eyes that had already become accustomed to the darkness, the man noticed the outline of a monster and someone's head in his hand. By the time Li Rongqi realized what had happened, it was already too late, as the sword blade had cut straight through him. He only managed to utter a curse in a trembling voice when a red stripe appeared on his neck. These were the last words of Li Rongqi, who fell to the floor with a thud as the monster passed by him. Feiya's sword began to vibrate, as if awakened by the drop of blood it had just spilled. Suddenly, footsteps were heard in the dark corridor. These were people who had come to the aid of the leaders. They all looked around, trying to figure out what was going on, and then one of them suddenly shouted curses in a trembling voice. And this was natural, since in front of him there was a huge monster with a bloody sword in his hands. Suddenly the light disappeared completely for literally a split second, and the man only had time to blink. But when he opened his eyes, he saw the creepy and threatening face of a monster right in front of him. Another split second passed, and for the men this world turned into pitch black, eternal darkness. After a series of dull blows and a flash of light, the monster was already passing by the enemies lying on the ground. And when Xiao thought that this was the end, he suddenly heard a man's voice coming from the stairs, shouting to stop. Looking up, Xiao saw a powerful male figure holding a sword, and there was not a drop of fear in it. Xiao sniffed and immediately realized that he was a level 6 professional, which was quite high. The man also stared at Xiao and realized that it was not a monster, as it did not have a special aura of madness. It's possible that he's a professional with a modified system, although if that were the case, He wouldn't have such a demonic aura. As he walked down the stairs, the man told Xiao that he was the only one in the world who could exist in a state between a monster and a human. If he were sold on the black market, he could compensate for all the damage he had caused, no matter who it was, but he was definitely unlucky enough to cross paths with the leader of Kaijiang. The damage done to Xiao would have greatly upset the higher-ups, but such an unusual find would please the bosses. They have been trying to crossbreed a human and a boss for a long time to gain new life, so now the boss has started to attack. He decided to strike first at the head, moving along the ground at great speed, but Xiao only tilted his head to the side without moving the rest of his body, as if he had anticipated the man's attack. The same one, suddenly stopping, thought that it was not for nothing that this monster was of humanoid appearance because he was even able to dodge a strong attack. But this only meant that the leader had already understood the maximum of the monster he was about to attack. With great speed, he pounced on Xiao and began to deliver hundreds of slashes with his sword. He moved so fast that his movements were difficult to track and attack back, so Xiao was left with wounds. The man grinned evilly, calling this ugly monster as tenacious as a cockroach. But he had another trick hidden away that would definitely not be obvious to this monster. Swinging, he flew at Xiao with the same enormous speed, who stood quietly, trying to keep track of the enemy. The monster jumped to the side, dodging the enemy's almost fatal blow, but it was as if he was just waiting for this. A sly smile appeared on his face as the man realized that he had managed to trick this creature. He stretched his arm forward and something quickly began to emerge from his sleeve as if it had been tied on before. Soon the man had a loaded Colt in his hand with the safety off. The leader raised his weapon, turned around, and aimed it straight at Xiao's head, who definitely wouldn't have had time to dodge such a blow. Without thinking, the man pulled the trigger, and first there was a click, followed by a loud shot. It was of deafening, explosive force, and hit the monster right in the head, and such a short distance would clearly be enough to blow off half of his face. The man smiled, because in many years of fighting this technique had never failed him. But he was sorry that he couldn't provide the heads with this creature alive, but even its body would be very valuable. However, strangely enough, the monster's body did not fall to the ground or even stagger, and when the smoke cleared, Xiao's head was completely fine. The man with one healthy open eye could not believe him because it was impossible to survive such a crushing blow. There was no point in hiding anymore, and the man realized that the monster could only survive because he had predicted the shot, but that was impossible. But suddenly the monster said that it was all about the 19th rapier, a technique that the man had honed perfectly, but these fencing skills were developed by Musk, that is, Xiao. These skills are simple and easy to learn, and were created specifically for foil fencers, and with in-depth study, all sorts of changes occur. This skill has high-speed damage and evasion, allowing you to destroy an entire army without taking a single hit. However, when the monster said that he created these techniques, he also added that he established rules of justice that the man clearly did not follow. The head himself was in shock because he knew that the technique was created by Musk and not by this monster, and destroying such monsters is justice. But suddenly Xiao said that he was not sure if he was a monster. But what about the people that this man had ruined? Is that fair? Here the chief relaxed his gaze and said that he did not know which area the monster had destroyed was the owner of, so he had one option: to get out of here while he was still alive. But there is something else that the monster needs to know. Humanity is constantly evolving, and whoever prevents it from moving forward, monster or human, will be punished. This is justice on the side of which the head always stands, and the monster will never understand this point of view. After these words, the enraged man gathered himself and with the same great speed attacked Xiao. He didn't move from his place, thinking about what the head of the company had said, realizing that he was absolutely wrong. This justice did not suit Xiao's attitude at all, and he released large claws from behind his back in displeasure. They quickly headed towards the approaching enemy, leaving behind only a shadow of a threat. The man, not understanding what kind of terrible weapon it was, immediately tried to dodge, and at first he succeeded. He didn't understand what kind of ability and power it was, but due to the shock he missed one blow. One of the pincers still grazed his shoulder, leaving a painful mark. At that moment, the monster bit him with all its claws, causing him to experience severe pain. The screams echoed through the roar of the rain and the empty corridor as there was no one else to help. All this was mixed with frequent flashes of thunder, and the air was filled with an atmosphere of chaos. The man lay on the ground, pinned by the monster's sharp claws, his breathing labored by the sudden attack. There was fear and bewilderment in his voice, and he asked, "What kind of monster is this?" But he just stood there and looked at the leader without a single expression of pity on his face, and then coldly said that he forgot to introduce himself. And his voice sounded confident and ruthless. He had no intention of doing so, but pulled his sword from its sheath and slashed at the enemy with great force. At that moment, determination flashed in his eyes, and he realized that he had defeated his last enemy for the day. This was evident from Xiao's sword, which began to glow as its blade absorbed the energy of the blood spilled in the recent battle. The bright light emanating from the sword gradually grew stronger, and soon it shone like a star located at the center of the universe. The light emanating from the blade seemed to attract the blood that remained on the ground, gathering it around itself, forming a vortex of bright red drops. The blood, rising rapidly as if animated, wrapped itself around the sword, filling it with strength and vital energy, which made it even more powerful. So the sword, stained with the blood of the demon, has accepted its new life, and inside it lies much spilled blood. But the weapon will faithfully serve the hands that hold it. Now, with the help of the bloody Feya, even the earth's crust could be easily divided because even his name had changed. On the outside, Xiao didn't feel any changes, but now that he was holding this sword, it was as if he could feel its heartbeat and its boundless potential, and Xiao's, they were a perfect match. On the way to the exit, the monster met another guy whose voice trembled with fear. His eyes were full of panic, but the monster just looked at him silently, showing no pity. The boy begged not to touch him, but Xiao had an opportunity to test the new power of his sword, which he did not want to miss. Gathering his strength, he raised his bloody sword Feya, and the air filled with tension. The blow was swift and powerful, like lightning, and when the sword came down, there was a deafening bloody explosion. Shards of glass flew around, and the red liquid splashed out like a red sea, blinding everything around. The force of the blow was so great that the guy was thrown to the side and almost flattened. As he flew away, he screamed, realizing that these were his last words since the shockwave spared no one. The impact was so strong that it shattered the windows of the huge building in which all this took place. Behind him, the military secret services, who had been watching the developing chaos for several minutes, gathered in panic. They understood that they were facing a horror that could destroy everything in its path, and they prepared for immediate action, putting up shields. Everyone realized the time was running out and tried to signal, but no one responded, so they had to act immediately. One of the soldiers approached Commander Jiang and reported that they had surrounded the Kaijiang building. The streets and even the underground sewers were under their control. He suggested sending people to attack, but Commander Jiang stopped him, suggesting that they first try to persuade the enemy to surrender, since they first needed to find out what was going on inside. Otherwise, innocent people might die, although the commander understood that there were no innocent people in this building. But it was not for them to judge, but for the federal government. A person who has exceeded his authority, even if he had 1,000,000 motives, must also be punished. Suddenly shouts began to be heard among the soldiers that someone had left the building. In front of everyone, the figure of an ordinary guy slowly walking away from the Kaijiang company appeared. He seemed to be happy, smiling slightly at the corners of his lips and looking at the rainy sky, which washed him with drops of rain from the blood stuck to his body. At this moment, Chen Liu had just learned that Xiaoqiu had gone to Kaijiang alone, and she also thought it was crazy. This guy seemed to have multiple lives, but Yang Qiang, who heard about this, immediately grabbed her umbrella and ran towards the exit. Chen Liu tried to stop her and wanted to go with her sister, but Yang Qiang did not listen to her and quickly ran out of the house. The rain was still pouring down, and the drops trickled down the fabric, creating a melodious sound, but anxiety filled Yang Qiang's thoughts. Suddenly her attention was drawn to the city army concentrated nearby. The soldiers stood in a row in full combat readiness. Their faces were serious, but they recognized Yang Qiang. The girl froze and asked what happened, but the soldier replied that they needed the girl to investigate a case. Then the soldier took out his phone and showed it screen of a surprised Yang Qiang, asking if she knows the man in the photo. The girl's eyes immediately widened in shock when she recognized the guy in the photo as Xiaoqiu. She immediately began to scream in alarm and ask what had happened to him and whether he was even alive. The soldier calmly replied that the guy was alive and, what's more, was feeling great. Thus, the action moves to the special purpose prison of the Defense Forces, where Xiaoqiu ended up. He sat alone in the cell during interrogation, but never said who he was or where he was from, which angered the general. Although the report says the boy confessed to attacking Kaijiang, the only thing known about him is his first and last name. His name is Xiaoqiu, but he has no birth certificate, passport, or other identification document. He was like a ghost, completely hiding from government surveillance, but they found out that Xiaoqiu was related to the girl Yang Chang. But when they found her and wanted to take her away, it suddenly turned out that people from the Bureau of Checking Secret Areas were also looking for her, since a secret thief had appeared. He can bypass monitoring and directly enter secret areas, and he is Xiaoqiu. The general became curious and asked, "Who is this Yang Chang?" The soldier replied that according to their information, this girl was a level 2 professional and her father was a level 5 professional, which is quite a lot for a general. The soldier added that Yang Chang's father used to serve in the army, but after being wounded, he resigned because his strength was already running out. He was originally supposed to serve as an administrative official in Dahe City, but he politely declined and then died in a battle with a great demon a few years later. According to the report, Yang Chang passed through the secret area with her team Zhanggang and met Xiaoqiu there, who appeared there without an official request. And the reason why Xiaoqiu defeated Kaijiang was because this campaign was going to take away the area where Yang Chang and her sister Yang Chenliu lived. So he decided to restore justice by becoming a fierce knight with a sword. These words interested the general, as they were spoken by another familiar voice, that of the chief of the department, Arthur, who entered the room. Arthur, looking at his watch, told the general that it was time for them to go and find out for themselves since there was no one to oppose Level 7 Commander Zhang and Level 6 Directorate Chief. These two could be said to be the strongest warriors in Dahe. So that guy inside was in serious trouble. At that moment, the door to the room where Xiaoqiu was sitting opened loudly and abruptly, and Commander Zhang walked in. At first, Xiaoqiu looked at him with complete indifference, but suddenly his gaze began to intently study the commander. He was even a little taken aback by the awkwardness, not understanding why this guy was staring at him like that. But then he realized that Xiaoqiu was not looking at him, but at his cloak, which was adorned with a bunch of awards, and a nostalgic expression appeared on the guy's face. It was strange, but the main question was different, so the commander sat down opposite Xiaoqiu and began the interrogation. Commander Jian said that given the gravity of the crime, the boy himself should understand what awaits him: the death penalty or financial retribution. After Xiaoqiu was added to the redemption squad, he would be sent to the front lines with the highest mortality rate. And only by destroying a sufficient number of enemies will the guy be able to atone for his crime and return to normal life. But the commander understood to himself that this was impossible. Those who join the redemption squad do not return alive and die after the first battle, and in order to return, you need to participate in from 100 to 3,000 such battles. The guy understood that anyone could clear their name in this way, but the commander suddenly said that judging by the guy's tone, he had already been to the front line. The commander wondered who he was there, a soldier or someone else. But Xiaoqiu only replied that he was indeed there, but his position was different. Commander Jean exchanged glances with Arthur, who was also surprised. After all, there weren't many professionals who were qualified to go to the front lines. It was even more difficult to survive there, so the commander decided to first compare photographs to understand who this Xiaoqiu really was. Suddenly he added that the guy was rather lucky because the commander, as the management nickname Arthur had begun, was already heading with the garrison to the front line to the monsters. Here Arthur added that he had been on the front lines for almost 10 years, and now he is considered a veteran, and the only one more qualified than him could be the hero Musk in the first batch. It was she who established this very line of retreat of the monsters, and the commander, as if to confirm these words, touched the order on his tunic, which had previously belonged to Mask. Commander Zhang added that he had previously fought under the leadership of this hero and was only able to look at his back. Here Arthur shouted out that if Xiaoqiu was on the front lines, then he should understand that the current peace was not achieved easily. But in a peaceful environment, there are many dangerous moments, such as Musk's situation with the federal parliament. There was a moment of silence in the room, and Arthur, clenching his teeth, said that he hoped the boy understood him. The fact that Xiaoqiu was able to sneak into the dungeons would be a shock to the entire society if they found out. Even in the best case, it will cost the lives of many professionals, and their normal lives will be destroyed. Xiaoqiu didn't respond to this, but simply continued to sit silently, staring at the floor, not intending to respond to this nonsense. Commander Zhang and Arthur also stared back in silence, and then the commander said that despite Xiao's many secrets, for the federal government this meant that defeat was just around the corner. The commander also hoped that the guy understood everything and would show generosity. because if he was sent to the federal capital, they would speak to him completely differently there. After taking one last look at the silent criminal, Arthur and Zhang left the room, hoping for the boy's intelligence. And he, looking after them, thought that he wouldn't mind visiting the federal capital one more time, but for now, it was unlikely. After all, he had a new main task, Rebirth of the Great Demon, where it was said that the same great demon did not die. The residual radiation that existed in people's bodies was actually an unstable source of the explosion. If we don't clean everything up completely, then over time the demon will recover from this accumulating and increasing radiation, which, for some reason, the federal government didn't clean up. This meant that there were 72 hours left until the demon's revival, and Xiao's mission was to destroy the great elemental demon and obtain its heart as a reward. The great demon is an elemental-level monster, but this does not mean that it has a high level of strength, because on average, a strong monster reaches level 13, and a weak one, level 7-8. In fact, Xiaoqiu didn't need the system notification, as he already knew that the monster would recover because all of this had already happened in his past life. After Mask's trial, the demon found one infected pro and used him as a carrier to resurrect himself like a weed, and at the time, the guy had just been sent to the front lines after the trial. The monster immediately, as if stung, began to diligently destroy all of Dahe, but did not have time to cause too much damage, as Mask destroyed it with one blow. But even then, he was heavily criticized and told that he came too late, that he had a light punishment, or that he hadn't cleared everything well last time, so that's why the demon came back. People died in the crash, so Musk was forced to apologize and was put back on the front lines, which led to him being tried again. And in this life, there is no longer a hero named Musk, but only an ordinary guy Xiaoqiu without passport data. But now the lives and deaths of those people had nothing to do with the new man Musk had become. Commander Jian was thinking about this too, silently looking out the window and wondering what this guy was planning. Arthur, lighting a fire in a lighter, asked why Jian was so polite to someone who was at the front, and he replied that he had long been retired, but like no one else, he understood the situation at the front. He had never seen guys of that age there with such a frantic strength, which could be judged by the injuries of those killed in Kaijiang. And it also seems like he has an unusual weapon, and he is not a simple professional at all. This is dual cultivation or even multi-profession cultivation. Arthur assumed that Xiaoqiu was simply a genius because people barely learn one profession in their entire lives and rarely even reach level 6. But at that age, he defeated a level 6 pro very easily. The commander replied that although the boy had talent, he was still a fool, since it was too foolish to risk his life on a campaign like Kaijiang. The people of the Federation should judge him, and they don't need such a genius, with which Arthur agreed and sadly added that the Federation even judged Musk. Compared to such a hero, it is not so difficult to condemn this minor genius because there are professionals working in the capital of the federal government. They do all this in Star City, built after humanity survived the dark times and urbanization that brought beautiful cityscapes. But at best, these were second-rate cities of the 20th, 21st century, which existed before the onset of the dark times. But Star City has achieved the title of the city of the future. He was a symbol of human rebirth, and it was there that the controversy was currently taking place over the actions of Xiaoqiu, who was considered an unbalanced psychopath and a brutal murderer. The chairman looked at Xiaoqiu's photo and said in surprise that he was too young to destroy a level 6 professional, and he must be very talented. The members of the Federation were furious because they considered such talent dangerous. So the criminal must be punished so that people would participate in their safety. One of the men suggested a public execution because the Kaijiang campaign was his source of income and now the path to it was cut off. The chairman replied that he understood everything and ordered that this criminal be sent to the front line, enrolling him in the first ranks of the redemption squad. Someone was surprised that the chairman did not even want to organize a public trial, which was a disappointment because without this, he could lose his authority over his subordinates. But the chairman was adamant and added that they had more important things to do now than this boy. The man stood up abruptly and asked angrily why no one had found out anything about the missing Musk yet. At that moment, all objections and discontent died down, giving way to total silence. The chairman added that the man could not have simply disappeared and that he was clearly hiding somewhere, possibly very close, but there had been no information about him for so long. Does anyone really think that this most powerful enemy will ever come and stand before them all?